Welcome. Thanks for coming. I know you guys had a long day and probably a long week. So don't know how the topic came up, but I was asked to speak on mental training, mental toughness. And I think it's a term that's misused, misapplied, and not very well understood. And you always hear cliches like it's more mental than physical and you got to be tough. And I worked in the UK 4 years and I heard terms like robust, resilient. And then I'd ask coaches, well, what does that mean? And I could never really get good definitions. I grew up in American football where you just practiced all day long and you just slam heads, and if you got injured, you rubbed dirt on it and you kept going, and then you were labeled tough. All right? So hopefully we're going to blow up some myths, and the goal of this lecture is, and don't worry about taking notes or whatnot, this slide deck's available, so you send an email to Blair and he can send you the slide deck. So I do a lot of work in return to play, return to perform in sport, all kinds of winter, summer Olympics, pro sport leagues, and I do a lot of work with military, Wounded Warriors Project, Military Wellness Initiative. So I get to spend a lot of time with some really special people that are very fit and have incredible mental skills. And so in the 90s, when I was doing pioneering work, I was like, well, how do you guys perform so well under pressure? And if these guys make a mistake, it's not a loss of a game. It's a loss of lives. This is serious stuff. So if you go to special forces anywhere in the world, they spend tons of money on this. And they have layers and layers of programs and retraining and analysis and debriefs. It's important, and there's a lot of resources, a lot of great minds on it. So why not study how these guys approach this and maybe weave that into how you look at things and how you develop your networks for these kind of things. So disclaimer, consumer warning, this lecture is super biased by my experience and my network, and ladies, I apologize, I'm not politically correct. Sometimes I get fired up, and with 38-hour jet lag, a word may come out here or there. So for the political correctives in the audience and the context distorters, couple things. I'm not implying that sport is war, although sport originated getting people ready for war. So I grew up in the Vietnam era. I buried 18 friends before I graduated college. So like I understand war and how serious it is. So it's not equal to war, but we can learn things from warriors. And I try to utilize best practice of people that encounter unique stressors. So awareness, discussions, and referrals. Eckhart Tolle is a guy I respect quite a bit. And I think this is a real simple overview that stress, like probably a third of the people in this room really don't want to be in the room, so they're feeling stress. Or a person that's standing along the wall would rather have a seat. That's stress. And there's a couple guys have been holding the beer for about 10 minutes and it's getting warm. That's stress. You'd rather have a cold beer. All right, so rather than mental toughness, I prefer the term mental resilience. And in military, paramilitary, that's the terminology. They don't talk. You don't hear the word toughness. It's mental resilience. So we're going to go through a synopsis of some work done by some researchers at the University of Pennsylvania dealing with special forces groups. So if you want to look it up, it was in the American Psychologist 2011, and Revich, Seligman, and McBride. And like I said, the University of Pennsylvania. So tons and tons of interviews, surveys, follow-ups, debriefs in the field with these guys on tours of mission. They now have data on guys that have done as many as 8 tours of duty. In Special Forces, that's a lot of tours. So this data is pretty hardwired. So the current work that they're doing with troops have some foundational areas. And the first one is preparation component. So what are the ABCs, the essentials, the fundamentals of developing mental skills? The second is sustainment. So you're in season or you're in battle. How do they hold people accountable? What do they measure? So this deployment cycle for us would be, how are we handling things in season? So a lot of you are here at a big competition. What's going on? What are your strategies? What notes are you taking? Are there trends in your group? Are there trends with gender? Are there trends with events? And the last is enhancement. So season ends or the meet's over. How do you debrief? How do you analyze it? How are you going to enhance their current understanding of skill set? So I coach pole vaulters, and coaching pole vaulters, you don't always get the prime seat. You got people screaming and yelling, and you don't have time to do a PhD. You got time to say 2 or 3 words. And if you're having to coach mental skills instead of technical skills, it's going to be a long day at the pit. So the key support factors, huge accountability systems. Do we hold people accountable for their behavior? I don't know how it is in Australia. You know, I'm down here every once in a while. I've coached Australians, but in North America, we have a real problem with accountability. Parents, teachers, headmasters avoid accountability. Kids are not responsible. Do you have the term helicopter parents here? Yeah. Yeah. So what is that really? They're not teaching accountability, are they? Debrief. We're going to get into this a little bit deeper. The layers and the timing of debriefs. So as a coach, you have an induction meeting before practice. Maybe you debrief after several menu items. You definitely do an informal debrief at the end of practice. Do you have a moderately formal at the end of the week? Do you have a more formal at the end of a cycle at different phases? What are the types of debriefs that you're using? What questions are you asking? Have you identified the essentials and fundamentals? You can't hold athletes accountable if you haven't identified the objectives. And action points. So have you ever been in a meeting and then 6 weeks later you're having the same meeting? And then 6 weeks later you're having that same meeting again? Well, what was that a failure? That was a failure to define action points and then having a gatekeeper that it held people accountable. Multiple sources of input and support. So in Special Forces, it's not a siloed process. It's not vertical, it's horizontal. When they debrief after a mission, everybody puts their nameplate on the wall and they go into the meeting. Everybody contributes. It's a horizontal process. I think in coaching, it's real easy to go top down and create silos, vertical silos in our squads and our teams. So working definition for me is mental resilience is a set of processes that enable good outcomes in spite of serious threats. And that's sport at the highest level. You're in an Olympic final in front of 88,000 people, billions watching on television. There's going to be an outcome. And for some people, that's a serious threat. How are you going to cope with that? How are you going to manage that? Do you have a set of processes? So this friend of mine took this picture, Afghanistan. That's an oh shit moment. And guess what's lurking in all these hills? Snipers. They got local interpreters, but they got a big problem. So how are these guys, can they bounce back? Can they persist from this adversity? No sweat. 10 minutes later, they were out of there. Nobody got shot. What mental resilience is not is boot camp training. Let's be honest, all Olympic finalists train hard. Why do only 3 get on the podium? So North American mental toughness is 5 a.m. workouts, train till you vomit, cockroach position on the ground. Most athletes in North America, they think if they're not vomiting, if they can't crawl to the car, it wasn't a good workout. That's not mental toughness. Special forces guys swim 20 miles in cold water because they have to. That's part of their job. That's not what makes them mentally tough. Have you ever had an athlete no height in the jump? Foul out in the throws. They're not tired. How in the hell are you tired? You took 3 jumps. I know shot putters don't like to walk from here to there, but come on, 3 throws, they're not tired. But they choked. They panicked. 100 meters, you can hold your breath and run 100 meters. They're not tired. So it's not a boot camp kind of thing. These gut-wrenching sessions and all that. It's not team building sessions, you know, like fall into my arms. Let's climb some ropes. And they have ropes courses down here, you know. Like I've been in all these corporate things. We're going to have a team building thing. We're going to build mental skills. We're going to go climb ropes. I'm like, are you kidding me? Now, special forces, they climb ropes. Yeah, because they have to climb ropes. It's not getting on the mountaintop, looking at your navel and centering yourself. You go see a sports psych, oh, you got to center yourself. You got to visualize. It's bullshit. Nice tool to have, but that's not going to make you mentally resilient. So you don't look at your nasal and all that. That's not mental resilience. So what did these guys find out? There's some protective factors that show up in special forces. And through time, they actually, in the surveys and the interviews, if guys don't have this and don't rank, they don't even start the program. Optimism. You'd say, well, that's obvious. Is it? Do a review of your squad. How many of your athletes would you say are eternal optimist versus pessimist? I grew up in a German home, a lot of German sayings. My grandma used to say, if you gave that woman a bowl of soup, she would shake her hair until there was hair in it. Because they were not optimists. Effective problem solving. Well, if you got helicopter parents, how good are they at problem solving? If you're a coach that always bails them out, always makes excuses for them, are you teaching effective problem solving? Faith. This one shocked me. And it doesn't have to be a spiritual faith. It could be faith in the squad, the team, your country, the program, or whatever, but they score huge in faith. They have faith. A sense of meaning. That's a good question at the beginning of the season. What's your purpose in life or in sport? What are you trying to get out of this? Do they have a sense of meaning? Do you think special forces guys are extrinsic reward guys? No. Self-efficacy. Another generational problem. Flexible. Well, it's a headwind. I'm going to no height. Oh, it's 38 degrees up here. I'm going to burn out. I'm going to melt. I'm boiling. Impulse control. How's your crew doing on that one? Empathy. This one shocked me too. These guys score off the charts in empathy. Kids today, pretty narcissistic. It's hard to be empathetic if you're a narcissist. In my experience, I was a classroom teacher for a lot of years, but maybe I'm wrong. And they crave and demand close relationships. Not too many lone wolves on Olympic podiums in my experience. So, related research in this area, emotional awareness. Can athletes tell you where they're at emotionally? Can you sense where they're at emotionally? Self-regulation. Can they raise or lower? So a special forces guy, 70-pound pack, runs 10 kilometers, has to drop down, and in 90 seconds take a heart rate from 200 to 50 beats because that's where you want it when you shoot. That's pretty good self-regulation. What skills do you teach in the realm of self-regulation? How many times they were just too fired up, or they weren't fired up at all? Well, have you taught them how to change that thermostat? Can they identify their signature strength? So in special forces, you have to list 5. You can't list 5, they wash you out. So as a coach, let's just take a pause. What are your 5 signature strengths as a coach or as a parent? Can you name 5? This was a strange one. They score off the charts in gratitude. They're on a 7-day mission, the sun comes up, these guys are looking at the sun and they're like, how awesome is this? How many kids today could tell you what they're grateful for? Well, if we want mentally resilient people, these are things that the data is showing. This is 20 plus years of study of some of the best in the world at mental resilience. And active, constructing, responding. How do they respond? So my wife's passive aggressive. I've been married 43 years. And I've yet to crack the code on being an active, constructing responder to a passive aggressive wife, but somehow we make it work. So Albert Ellis was really kind of the godfather of this kind of work, cognitive behavior therapist. And his loop is, when you encounter adversity, this triggers beliefs. And those beliefs over time predict or project into consequences. So what your emotions are driven by this belief system. And the behaviors result from this. So this, me and my wife before I flew over. Perception, how do we perceive things? How many of us had a kid, an athlete, in a dual meet or a low-key meet, they're all world. And then we take them to a higher level meet, and it's like they've never been coached. And they revert not back to middle school problems, but age group problems. You say, you're 28 years old. Why are we having this conversation? There's something wrong with their perceptual grid and loop. So in this explanatory style by Ellis, how do we explain negative and positive experiences in life? Well, some of those earlier checklists, if you're an optimist with faith, are you going to explain and encounter differently than if you're a pessimist, a narcissist? Yeah. Can you shape and change people in those realms? These people do it. Big one is self-talk. How many people in here have athletes chart in their diaries their self-talk daily? Be interesting. So all my athletes, they have to write down every day 3 things they're grateful for and 2 or 3 themes of their self-talk. And we monitor and look at those trends. Oh, I'm worthless. Oh, I'm terrible when it's hot. Oh, I'm terrible when it's raining. Oh, I never do good in a headwind. Oh, coach doesn't like me. Oh, my dog ran away. Oh, my car won't start. So what are they fueled with by the time they come through the gate for practice, if that's been their loop? So in Texas, we call them naysayers. So everything that's negative is permanent. How many of us had an athlete say, this always happens to me? You've never heard that in all the years of coaching. Or, I always foul on my first jump. Or, if I don't hit a big one on my first throw, I can't win this meet. So they make these things permanent and they're uncontrollable. Like, I have no control over this. And these things are pervasive. You like those boots? Do they call them wellies down here? No. Yeah. Well, I live in Texas, so we have a lot of these guys. We call them can-doers. So they're optimists. If they get hit with a negative event, it's like, that's one time. PGA golfers, when they're on a roll, they're can-doers. When they're in a slump, they're back there in the pig pen. So it's not a permanent state. We ebb and flow through these various states and phases. So an optimist, it's temporary. I can change this in a New York minute. And there's certain things that cause this to happen. It's not some metaphysical rainbow that came and took a dump on my head. So related to this, and this is some elephant in the room stuff, post-traumatic stress disorder. Anybody coached an Olympian in here or a world qualifier? Anybody coached one that bombed? Anybody had an athlete go to senior nationals and bomb? Schools champs and bombed? Ranked #1 and bombed? There's degrees of PTSD. And sometimes if they have several of these back to back to back, it becomes clinical. And you need outside help. You need CBT help, cognitive behavior therapy help. It's real in sport. There's a survey done in track and field and athletics after the London Games with 2 countries that I'm not allowed to say which countries. 40% of the Olympians were clinically diagnosed PTSD. The researchers doing the analysis didn't know if they were soldiers or athletes or whatever. They were clinically identified. Delayed stress syndrome. They seem okay after the meet. Next week in training, it's going all right, and then the bottom falls out. That's a huge phenomenon. We see that a lot. Adjustment syndrome. Oh, jet lag. Oh, weather. Depression. So last year in the NFL, I work in the NFL, there were 92 attempted suicides. 92.
How many players in the NFL?
Couple hundred. Less than 1,000.
45 for teams.
It's real. I'd be willing to bet if you did just some basic surveys that rank depression warning signs, probably a 1/3 of your group is either clinical or subclinical. They cost a lot. The biochemical neurotransmitter imbalance that's occurring in that state is massive on performance. Anxiety, panic disorders. When I was growing up, those terms weren't even out there. I've got athletes that have full-blown panic attacks at certain meets. Well, guess what? Those people wouldn't be in a special forces group. So what are we doing? Who's in your network to help you identify that? Who's in your network to help you steer people and have important conversations with athlete and their significant others around them? And then conduct disorders. So you'd think in special forces there'd be a lot of conduct disorders. You'd be shocked. It's not what you would think. Those people get washed out before they ever get rank. So this loop, these inaccurate thoughts, can be generated by explanatory style, how you explain things to yourself or to those around you. So do you have accurate causal beliefs? Can you identify the true causes of your fear or your concern? Can you identify distractions, things that trigger you off this loop? Can you identify your emotional state? So hopefully you're saying, wow, this is a lot. So this has layers and spectrums. Like mental toughness is not just running till you puke. There are serious fundamentals and essentials. So in the teaching, the pedagogical concept part of this, big branch of self-awareness. Can you identify your thoughts? Can you identify your emotions? Can you identify your behavior? What's the number one word you hear kids rock up to practice? How you feeling? What's the number one word? I'm fine. If my wife says fine, I know I'm in big trouble. That's not accurate. Thoughts. So do an experiment with some of your better people in the next couple weeks. Write down 3 thoughts at the beginning of practice, 3 thoughts at the end of practice. You're going to be shocked. Ask them if they can identify their emotional state before, during, and after. Are they even aware of their behaviors? Do they even know what positive behavior looks like or entails? So can we identify these patterns that are counterproductive? Self-regulation. So can you regulate impulses, thinking, emotions, behaviors to achieve goals? And this is critical. The willingness and ability to express emotions. So the 2 ends of the spectrum, I'm going to hit this wall and break my fist, and now I can't shoot the gun, or you stuff it. Well, in psychology, there's a formula, RAD formula. If you repressed anger, it yields depression. So the Stoics have got trouble, and the conduct disorder have got people. Those are the ends of the spectrum. We got trouble with both of those. Can we find that middle zone, this moderation zone? A lot of people can regulate some of these factors. But this second part, the willingness and ability to express emotions, because we got this myth in sport, oh, you got to be stoic, you got to be serious. I had a girl, she was bronze medal in the '84 Olympics. Yeah, I've been coaching that long. Kim Turner, 100 hurdles. She was from Detroit. Anybody know Eddie Murphy, the comedian? So she went to the same high school as him in Detroit. Rough, inner city, smoke dope, drink wine, crazy girl. And I'm a German coach. I'm young, and like, you got to be serious starting Wednesday for Saturday's meet. And we got all these scripted warm-ups and focus beyond all of that. So my first year with her, performances are all over the chart. Well, she's identified as Olympic potential. We started working with sports psychologists. We did a survey, come in the room, sit down, and the guy goes, "You're the problem," pointing at me. And I'm like, I'm the problem. This girl smokes 15 joints a week, drinks 5 bottles of wine. She's out with guys till 4 in the morning, and I'm the problem? He goes, "Yeah, you're the problem." I was like, what? He said, she has the ability to focus like this. And if she's focused too soon, she runs out of gas. I said, so what, I'm supposed to let her smoke 5 joints, drink a bottle of wine before the gun goes off? No, but let her sign autographs and wave to the crowd, and don't be so dogmatic with the warm-up. Well, she won Olympic bronze, so there was something to it. So where are these people with their expression? So optimism, the first step is, can you see goodness in things, people, places, and things? Can you identify what's controllable? Do you live in reality? Like, where's Christian? Craig. Okay, so in the UK, I was responsible for a lot of coaches and a lot of athletes, and they'd come in and we'd do the induction, and they'd go like, I'm gonna win an Olympic medal, and I'm like, no, you're not. And the coach, oh yeah, we got this plan, we're gonna win the Olympic medal. I'm like, your PB is 46 seconds. Like, is everybody's plane gonna crash on the way to the Olympics? Like, that's not being wedded to reality. 10 years old, I'm going to be an Olympic finalist. Nice goal, nice thought. But if you live that lie, you're going to have a miserable life. All right, counterproductive beliefs. Mental agility, flexible. Perspectives. Can you step back, take a 10,000-foot view? Kids today are on microscopes. They don't know how to use a telescope. Can they see the big picture? This is going to take 4 years. No, I want it tomorrow. Why didn't I run fast? Last week I did. Now I'm not running fast. Well, they try new strategies. My grandfather was German. He didn't speak English too well, so what he learned was parables, little stories. And I was hard-headed, and I wanted to do my things my own way. And after I screwed up 4 or 5 times in a row with the same faulty thinking, the same strategy, he said, Dan, he goes, if you get out of the truck and you slam your hand in the car door, maybe the next time you get out of the truck different. How many of us have kids that attack it the same way every time and it's always a failure? Oh, I've got to warm up this way, or I can't take this many warm-ups, or I've got to lift this way on Tuesday, or I'm going to be shit on Saturday. So I coached a guy in England, Greg Rutherford, who was an injury-prone personal health disaster. And he could only weight train about once every 2 weeks. He could only train 2 or 3 days a week. I'm talking all year long. That's what he did for 9 years of his career. If the density pattern got any more, he blew up. You can ask Christian. One of his biggest injuries, he was typing at home on the computer. The printer had a piece of paper that hit the floor. He leaned over to get it, tore all 3 adductors. We had to try some different strategies. This guy would go on an airplane and get food poisoning and not eat the meal. Character strengths. So everybody in here, what's your number one strength as a coach? Think to yourself, your number one strength. What's your second strength? What's your third? Can you get to 5? If you can't, how can your athletes? Do you know how to do that? Do you know the process of doing that? Can you see it in others? Modeling. It's the old adage, keep strengths strong. Slowly fill in the gaps and modify weaknesses. If you get caught up dealing with just weaknesses and problems and issues and you don't polish the car in strength, now everything's average. That's a driving mantra in Special Forces. Cultivating a strength approach. Connection. How do you build relationships within your team, with your athletes, with the performance staff around you, with parents, significant others. Effective communication. Can you show empathy? Ask for help. Offer help. How many kids will really ask for help right now? It's a problem. If you're in a 10-man Special Forces squad, those guys will ask for help in a New York second. Because 5 seconds later, if they didn't, bad things are happening. Will they offer help? Do they volunteer? Do they get outside themselves? You see, this is how you develop mental health, mental resilience. Yes. These are the things that they monitor, that they polish, that they discuss, that they do research on with these groups. So building this mental toughness or resilience, there's an ABC. What's the event? What are your beliefs? What are the consequences? This is a pretty good grid to do after practice or after a meet. Okay, the activating event, we just competed or we just did the workout. What's your beliefs coming into it, during it, and after? How'd that work for you? So a real critical step is finding activating events. You ever had an athlete that a certain rival shows up and they totally change? That's an activating event. You ever had an athlete, the parent shows up to watch the meet and it changes everything? Those are activating events. There's millions of attacks that occur through activating event. And this can be in training or during a competition. I had guys like, I don't test well in the weight room. I said, guess what? You're not going to test well in the ring either. You go in the ring, you got 3 throws in qualifying, it's Olympic qualifying round, and you're telling me you don't do well in test? What the hell do you think that is? So these activating events, they're not only professional in the realm of sport, but they're personal. My granddaughter's 7, super good at reading this. I'll come home, she'll meet me in the driveway. Grammy's having a bad hair day. That's code for let's leave. So can you and can the athlete identify those athletically and also in their personal life? You ever had a competition wiped out by a relationship problem? That just didn't happen. Like the fairy godmother of emotions just didn't tonk him on the head and say, let's have a big fight here. That was brewing. So the goal here is to separate acting events from what you say to yourself in the heat of the moment. These emotions and behaviors and the thoughts that they generate, what are we doing with that cycle? So here's anecdotal research. I know that it's not going to please all the sports scientists in here, but I've kept data on this. It's my 47th year in coaching. I've had a few guys on the podium and gals on the podium. World champs, Olympics, Europeans, Commonwealth. And the athletes who can identify problematic self-talk and fix it in the moment get on the podium. Those that can't seldom get on the podium. Self-talk is a big KPI, super big KPI. So this explanatory style that we're bouncing around with and these patterns of thinking can increase technical efficiencies, output mental health, or diminish them. How you explain things, how you color things have huge, huge inputs in efficiencies and outputs and mental health. And it's a longitudinal drip. If you're a pessimist, you may get by with it for a while, a certain stage of the season, but eventually it's going to bite you in the butt. There's no middle ground on this. Thinking traps. So jumping to a conclusion based on zero evidence or very small amount. So how many of us overgeneralize? That's a thinking trap. personal worth, motivation, single episode. So I had a car wreck when I was 16, my fault. Knock on wood, I haven't had one since. My wife had a car wreck when she was 16. Every time she gets in the car, she's convinced she's going to have another. She sends me a text off the airplane. You made it on all those planes? None of them crashed? Were any of them Boeing 737 MAX? Like, I go to Canada to work. She goes, did you see any terrorists? I'm like, she's trapped sometimes. So icebergs. How many people have heard the term iceberg? So these are things that are lurking below the surface. Family of origin issues, previous relationship issues with coaches, teachers, teammates. These icebergs can wreck ships. Do you know what your athletes' icebergs are? What's buried that we don't see on the surface? So I do a lot of debriefing continuously. So hopefully I'll catch up with Craig, catch up with Christian while I'm down. And it's been years since we've been together, but sometimes those debriefs, I'll learn stuff and say, well, why didn't you ask me that 8 years ago? It was an iceberg and we never talked about it. So the questions you got to ask is this process or this belief or this viewpoint or this thought train, is it still meaningful? Is it accurate? Is it too rigid? Is it useful? Yeah, you know, people get tired of me saying this a lot. I'm always saying, how's that working for you? Energy management is critical, and arousal levels. So we all know the arousal curve's inverted. Where are you at? Some of it depends. So like shot putters can be up here, pole vaulters better be here. Where are you at? Can you regulate it? If I'm up here, how do you modify the warm-up? How do you modify what they do between jumps or throws or between rounds? If you don't know that, then how are you going to modify it? If you don't know what it is and how to practice the management of it. It's a skill. You have to practice that. How many times you had an athlete come out, I'm not feeling it today, I'm flat. You ever had that feedback?
At least weekly.
Yeah. So when I was a younger coach, I was a real smart ass. And I didn't have a lot of tact and patience like I do now. And so, I feel like shit, I didn't sleep too well, weather's not great. I'm like, well, what are you going to do when you go to Europe this summer? You're going to have jet lag, you're going to be a roommate that's snoring, and you'll catch a cold on the bus, and like, you just going to punt? Do you have a strategy in suboptimal and not just optimal? So it's not only being able to adjust, it's being able to perform and work out in these various zones. Problem solving. In my experience, the great athletes love puzzles. That's the intrinsic part of their motivation for doing their event. They love the puzzle, the chase, the solving. So most of the day we're dealing with problems, solutions, long and immediate. Be careful with confirmational bias. Catastrophic thinking. Anybody ever had an athlete like that? We all fall into this loop at some stage of career lives. You know, your daughter goes on her first date. I guarantee you most guys in the room, if they're honest, they had a few moments of catastrophic thoughts. Because I just remember what I was like on my first date. I'm like, I'll kill this guy. All right, so how do they define it in special forces? Rumination about irrational worst case outcomes. So Special Forces squad hiking through a valley, mountains all around, snipers firing, IED goes off. Can they stop the mission? Can they abort the mission? They're on a rescue mission. They got to keep going. So if they start drifting into irrational worst case outcomes, that squad's in big trouble. They're going to lose a lot of men. So how do we capture those thoughts? How do we put them on hold? Come up with the best case scenario. Okay, there's a pretty cool article a week or two ago. Girl goes to Europe, poles don't make it. She has to borrow poles. None of the poles are even close to what she needs. Still ends up third in the Diamond League. Not many female pole vaulters could have pulled that off at that moment. They would have been catastrophic. So how do we capture that and identify some outcomes? Yeah, it's okay to say, well, this could happen, but this might happen, and perhaps even that. How many of you ran or performed at a PB level after an injury or a sickness? You knew you weren't in great shape, but somehow it happened. Well, at that point, you came up with some outcomes that were optimistic. So how do you come up with these coping strategies? Contingency planning. Special forces are contingency masters. No mission goes to form. Do you plan, when you go and you're preparing for a big meet, do you go through all the scenarios? So I've taken a lot of kids to their first world champs or world juniors or Olympics or whatever. And when I was a young coach, I made a lot of mistakes. They weren't ready. Like this one guy, coach, you didn't tell me they were going to put me in the control room for 50 minutes and I couldn't get up. That was bad contingency planning. Stuttgart 93, triple jump, qualifying 38 athletes. Guess what? You're going to jump once every 25 minutes. Well, if you're one of those guys that jumps in practice, all of a sudden you got 28 minutes between jumps in the biggest meet of your life, and you've never done that, you've got a problem. So catastrophic planning is a virus that's easily caught, and it feeds itself subconsciously, and guess what? It spreads. So I've been on national team staffs where the first day or two didn't go so well. Guess what? Boom. The reverse, in London we lucked out. We had a thing called Super Saturday, and guess what? That stuff's contagious. So antidotes to mental chatter. Strategies based on evidence, optimism, and perspective. These are the three big rocks that people that are really good at controlling and modifying self-talk and that chatter is they really pursue true, immediate evidence. They're optimistic about options they have before them, and if they can't get out of it, they change perspective. You see some athletes that watch during the meet and some that don't. That's a strategy. This triad that they're attacking is minimizing things, rationalizing things, and living in denial. These are the three balls that you're trying not to juggle. Ah, it's no big deal. I'll get it next time. You know how many people go to 2 Olympics? Not many. So the next time plan didn't work. Well, it was just a bad day, or my coach was an idiot, or just denial. So fear, we use this on our squad. It's an acronym, false evidence appearing real. Most fears are unfounded. So one of my athletes has had a really bad drug alcohol problem. He's went to clinic, hospital, he's going to meetings, 12-step meetings and all of that. And so we have him keep a log. He's a worrier, a projector. And so I'm kind of a sponsor for him, and he sent me his log. In 1 week time, he had 292 things he was worrying about. So then his next homework was, I want you to go circle the ones that actually happened. He circled 3. So it's not necessarily about replacing it with a positive. It's a way can you stop it at first, just like stop. Let me change perspective. Let me get in a different channel. And these themes of negative thoughts are usually buried in iceberg beliefs. So we have to figure those out because they're going to erupt in the heat of battle. Gratitude. So we've done quite a bit of research with special forces guys, especially brain injuries. And the guys that get really good about expressing it, identifying it, the health benefits biochemically are amazing. The sleep patterns change radically. And obviously, if those 2 things are rocking and rolling, your relationships start working out. So in these character strengths in the Army, these are the words that you see in any Army base in America. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. You go in any Army base in the United States, you see those words on a wall somewhere. So if you don't know strengths of others, how are you going to cultivate or identify or massage or nudge your strengths? If you don't, the list is endless. But can you identify character strengths in your athletes, in yourself, in your performance staff? Because if you can't, then how are you going to teach the athletes to? So the catastrophic failures I've experienced, I've been to 10 Olympic Games on the summer side, 5 on the winter. And most of the really huge wipeout failures, like just total bomb, national stories, were rooted in relationship issues. It may be relationship with spouse, coach, head coach, team doctor, agent, shoe company. Something went south that blew it up. So the 3 skill sets to be consistently bold and effective: active, constructive responding, praise, and communication styles. Those are the countermeasures. So this is me and my son. We have some rows. And we can drift into this active destructive like super quick. He points out my negatives, I point out his. We end up like this, and then 5 days before we speak again. I'd love to get to active constructive, where we're both authentic, we're enthusiastic, and we're supportive of one another. That's happened 3 times in his 33 years. A lot of that's my stuff too. Passive constructive. So, nice job. What does nice job mean? Hey, you did well today. Passive destructive. How's your squad? How do you hold people accountable? Do you measure these metrics? Most squad problems are centered in these 4 balls. And this isn't permanence. Like my son and I can go through all 4 of these. Unfortunately, we spend a lot of time there. And we're aware of it. We work on it. Praise. Pointing out a specific strategy, a specific effort, a specific skill that result in a good outcome. A lot of us, attaboy, that was good, yeah, whistle, those are too global. In special forces, in the debriefs, they are very specific. Hey, you pulled the trigger well, you handled the radio perfectly, we needed flight support. They're very specific at what they praise, and they talk a lot about effort. Classroom teachers in the room, you know that praising effort is a huge component if you're going to be a successful classroom teacher. Not just outcome. Kids are so caught up in outcome measures, they're never going to embrace the process if all you hammer is the outcome. And identifying skill. Like I've coached some motor morons, like guys can't walk and chew gum. But there's something they did that got them to that level. There's something they're skillful at that got them to that level. The nice job is just too global. So, can you identify and work to understand the situation? Can you move towards a good change? Can you list the benefits of the situation relationship if you were to effect a change? Are you objective and accurate? Can you express concerns and perspective? Coaches, we talk a lot. We're pretty one-directional. How well do we listen? What's the art of listening? Can you say, I think I hear you say, or you're feeling this? That totally disarms the conversation rather than, oh, you're saying this. That perspective matters. So like we said, when they go into a debrief, Special Forces, nameplates are on the wall, all 10 people contribute, everyone emotes their perspective on the mission. So sustaining the MRT pre-deployment, post. So this is like our pre-meet and post-meet scenario. So I think we can learn things from how they debrief and what they go over and the metrics that they're using and the accountability indices that they're using. So what are the psychological demands and reactions during the entire composition? That's critical. Do you have contingency plans? If this happens, what are we going to do next? If that happens, what are we going to do next? Any jump coaches in the room? A few. You ever had a guy come down and they foul this much? And you move them back. And they next jump, they foul the same amount, and you move them back. And they foul the same amount. That's not a very good contingency plan to keep moving back, is it? But that's the number one go-to. Good contingency plans, all possible outcomes, all possible occurrences. So enhanced mental skills, building confidence, goal setting, process, procedures, attentional control, energy management, imagery. These are things when they're in country, in mission. Those are discussed every mission and people are held accountable to it. So we'll wrap up. And like I said, this slide deck will be too, but really important is number 12. It's easy for us to be super critical, meaning well, but do we hunt the good stuff? So, not a super deep concept, but what I want to point out is the essentials and the fundamentals the military are using to tackle this idea about enhancing mental resilience, the ability to cope with things under fire and come up with good solutions in a repeatable manner. So I doubt anybody will take away 10 things or whatnot. If it's making you think a little bit, then the goal of the lecture was achieved. It for sure should start discussion with your peers and maybe some of the athletes on your squad. These are our essentials, these are fundamentals, these are KPI factors. And KPI is a double-edged sword. It's an indicator, but it's also an inhibitor. And it's how we juggle these balls that will determine whether our athletes are resilient or not. We good?